Section 1. You're standing in your kitchen late at night, phone blowing in your hand, thumb hovering over the screen. You posted something small, just a quick thought, a little frustration of can anyone relate? And now it's turning into a whole thing. You're rereading replies, checking who viewed your story, watching your pulse climb like you're back in an argument you didn't mean to start. Here's the uncomfortable question: are you sharing to connect, or are you trying to bleed off emotion in public because it feels like the fastest way to feel better? Most people think the problem is the internet is toxic or people are too sensitive. But the deeper problem is simpler and more personal. You're letting the online world reach into your private life and take more from you than it gives back. You're giving it access to your attention, your mood, and your self-image, and you're doing it in tiny moments that barely register until you feel drained. And the cost isn't abstract. It hits your focus when you sit down to work and a single comment keeps looping in your head. It hits your relationships when something you posted becomes a side conversation you didn't consent to having, or when someone you care about reads your tone through a screen and gets it wrong. It hits your confidence when you start anticipating judgment before you even speak, like there's an invisible audience in the room with you all the time. It hits your sleep when you put the phone down but your body is still in alert mode, replaying what you said, what they said, what you should have said, what you hope they don't say next. And over time, it chips away at something more important than likes or replies: your sense of privacy, your steadiness, your peace. If nothing changes, you don't just lose time. You lose control of your inner life. You start living slightly outside yourself, performing, defending, explaining, bracing. Even when you're alone, you're not really alone. Your mind is still in the crowd. So today, you're going to learn 3 concrete outcomes you can use immediately. First, you'll be able to decide what stays private and what belongs online, without turning into someone who never shares anything. Second, you will reduce the mental toll of comments, DMs, and invisible audiences, so you stop paying emotional rent to places that don't protect you. Third, you'll feel less exposed and more grounded in who you are offline, even if you stay active online. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. If you want steady Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships every week, this is the channel for you. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's get honest about what oversharing actually is, because most people misunderstand it. Oversharing isn't always telling strangers your deepest secrets. Sometimes it's subtler. It's posting while you're emotionally hot because you want relief. It's turning a private frustration into a public signal because you want someone to validate you fast. It's writing something vague that you know a specific person will recognize. It's replying in a comment section like you're in court, trying to prove you're right, because it feels unbearable to be misunderstood. It's checking the same thread repeatedly because your nervous system thinks there's unfinished business. And you might tell yourself, I'm just being real. But being real without boundaries isn't bravery. It's exposure. There's a difference between openness and leakage. Openness is chosen. Leakage is compulsive. Openness makes you feel more whole afterward. Leakage often makes you feel slightly emptier, even if you get supportive replies, because you gave away something tender in a space that can't hold it. Here's the other trap: the internet feels intimate, but it isn't personal. It feels like you're talking to people, but you're often speaking into a room that's structurally indifferent. Algorithms don't care about your context. Comment sections don't carry tone. People project their own life onto your words. Screenshots erase time and intention. And once something is out there, it has a life of its own. Even harmless sharing can become a story someone else tells about you. That's why you feel that specific kind of stress that's hard to explain. It's not always fear. It's that itchy awareness of being perceived. You can't fully relax when you're waiting for the next reaction. Even good reactions can keep you on the hook. Your mind starts scanning. Who liked it? Who didn't? What did they mean by that emoji? Why did that person view my story but not respond? And if someone criticizes you, It can feel like your whole day is suddenly up for debate. This is where Stoic thinking gets useful without being dramatic. The Stoics weren't saying never speak or never share. They were saying, protect what is yours to govern. Your attention is yours to govern. Your choices are yours to govern. Your character is yours to govern. But the crowd's interpretation is not yours to govern. The moment you hand your piece over to an audience you can't control, you're volunteering to be yanked around. And I want you to notice something important. You don't have to be famous for this to mess with you. You can have 50 followers or 5,000. The mechanism is the same. The more you post from a place of emotional urgency, the more you train your brain to seek regulation through exposure. It becomes, feel something posted, wait for reaction, feel more. That loop is exhausting. It makes you reactive. It makes it easier to bait. It makes your mood dependent on other people's attention. The goal of this episode isn't to make you cold. It's to make you clean. Clean boundaries. Clean sharing. Clean choices. You're still you. You're just not handing out access to the tender parts of you like they're free samples. And to keep this practical, we're going to build a simple internal line, one you can use before you post, before you reply, before you explain. Not a complicated system. A line you can remember when you're tired, lonely, stressed, or irritated. Because that's when you usually get pulled into oversharing and online drama, when your guard is down and you want relief. First, we're going to tear apart the belief that sharing more automatically makes you more authentic, because authenticity without selection becomes self-betrayal. Next, we'll expose how online spaces quietly turn emotional expression into performance, and why that leaves you feeling drained even when people agree with you. Then, you'll learn a simple pause that creates space between feeling and posting, so you choose your level of exposure instead of leaking it. After that, we'll build a few personal rules that protect your peace, rules that are realistic, not extreme, and that work even if you're busy and stressed. Finally, we'll put it all into a real-life Friday night moment where you're tempted to post something that would have haunted you all weekend, and you'll feel how a boundary changes the whole outcome. Section 2. The first boundary that actually changes everything is this: don't post or respond while you're emotionally activated, because urgency is the fastest way to hand your piece over to strangers, coworkers, or people who don't even know the full story. When you hit send in the heat of the moment, you're not communicating, you're dumping tension. And if you never change this, you'll keep creating small online fires that steal your focus the next day, strain relationships in ways you can't fully undo, and leave you cleaning up your own words when you should be living your life. Here's why this works in a simple, human way. When you're activated, angry, embarrassed, lonely, wired, hurt, your body wants relief more than it wants truth. Your phone becomes a release valve. Posting feels like exhaling. Replying feels like taking back control. But what you're actually doing is exporting an internal emotion into a public space that has no obligation to hold it gently. The moment you post, your nervous system starts waiting. You refresh to see who liked it. You scan for tone and replies. You brace for misunderstanding. Even supportive feedback can keep you on the hook, because now your mind is tracking the room. That's why you can't settle. You traded the possibility of calm for the certainty of stimulation. This boundary also works because time changes your interpretation. When you're activated, your mind tells dramatic stories. They disrespected me. They don't care. Everyone's judging me. If I don't respond now, I'll look weak. Those stories feel true because your body is an alarm. But if you wait, sometimes just minutes, you often see new options. You realize the message was clumsy, not cruel. You see that you're hungry, tired, or stressed from something else. You notice you don't actually want a debate, you want dignity. A calmer, more focused version of you isn't someone who never feels triggered. It's someone who refuses to let a temporary spike decide a permanent record. So the practical move is a pause that's long enough to let your system cool down, but short enough that you'll actually use it when you're tired and tempted. Not a complicated routine. Not a big "I'm taking a break from social media" announcement. Just a delay that keeps you from bleeding emotion into the feed or into a thread you'll regret. Here's the exact microscript. Say it to yourself, or use it as your internal line before you type. I don't need to respond or post this right now. I'll check back on it tomorrow. That sentence does two things. It reminds you that urgency is a feeling, not a fact. And it moves your identity from reactive to intentional. You're not saying never. You're saying not while I'm hot. Let's put this into a very normal North American moment. It's Wednesday afternoon. You're in Canada or the US, sitting at your laptop, juggling a couple deadlines, when a coworker drops a message in a Slack channel. Can we get someone to handle this correctly next time? It's vague, but it feels aimed at you. You start typing fast, trying to sound professional while your heart is pounding. You defend yourself publicly, you add extra context, you toss in a little edge, and then you hit send. Someone reacts with a thumbs up. Someone else replies with a joke. Now you feel exposed. You can't focus, because you're waiting to see if it escalates, and your mind keeps replaying what you said and how it landed. You still feel the spike, but you don't type yet. You read the message once, you set your hands down, and you say the line internally, I don't need to respond or post this right now. I'll check back on it tomorrow. You take 10 minutes to finish one small task, one email, one file, one simple win, so your brain stops spiraling. When you return, you send a short private message instead. Hey, I saw your note. Can you clarify what part you meant so I can fix it? The drama disappears because you refuse to perform your defense in public. Now take a relationship example, because this is where the emotional stakes get sharper. It's Friday evening. You're home, you've had a long week, and someone you're dating sends a text that reads cold, K, that's it. You panics, overexplains, double texts, or posts a vague story like people are weird just to feel supported by the crowd. Now you're not just dealing with one person, you're dealing with an audience and your own embarrassment. You pauses. You don't respond while activated. You don't post. You put the phone down and let the initial sting pass. Later, you ask one calm question that actually helps. Hey, is everything okay? You seem short, just checking in. Or you decide you don't need to chase clarity at that moment at all. Either way, you protect your peace first, or your words become cleaner because you didn't write them from panic. Notice what changed in both examples. The situation didn't magically become easy. You simply stopped giving it instant access to your mouth. That's the boundary. You're not banning emotion. You're preventing emotion from publishing itself. Here's the tiny action that makes this real today, not someday. Choose one place where you tend to react fast, one platform, one group chat, one comment section, one person you always reply to immediately. For the next 24 hours, set a rule. If you feel a spike, tight chest, rushing thoughts, heat in your face, you wait 30 minutes before posting or replying. 30 minutes is enough to shift your state. And if you're thinking, I can't wait that long, that's exactly why you should. The urgency is the habit. The delay is the boundary. If you want to make it even easier, pair the rule with a simple environment move. Move the app off your home screen for one day. Turn off notifications for that platform for one day. Or set your phone face down and out of reach for one day when you feel activated. You're not doing this forever. You're proving to your brain that you can tolerate not reacting. Now we're going to slow this down and practice, because the whole point is that you won't remember this when you're flooded unless your body has rehearsed it. Right now, take 3 slow breaths with me. In through your nose, hold for a beat, and out through your mouth. Again, slower than you want to. One more time, and let your shoulders drop a little on the exhale. Now bring to mind a recent moment where you reacted online and later felt exposed or annoyed with yourself. Not to shame yourself, just to see it clearly. Notice what you felt right before you posted or replied. Was it anger? Was it an embarrassment? Was it loneliness? Was it the need to be understood immediately? Now say the microscript once, out loud if you can. I don't need to respond or post this right now. I'll check back on it tomorrow. Say it again, slower, like you're teaching your nervous system a new rhythm. This isn't avoidance. This is control. Avoidance is refusing to address something that matters. Control is choosing the timing and the container so you don't turn your life into a live stream of your worst moments. Sometimes you'll still respond the same day. Sometimes you'll still share something personal. The boundary is that you do it from steadiness, not from heat. And there's a bigger shift hiding inside this small pause. You stop living like you owe people immediate access. You stop treating every comment, DM, or vague message like it's a fire alarm. You become the kind of person who can be provoked without becoming public. That's rare. And it's powerful. Hold on to this, because it sets up the next tool. In the next part, we're going to deal with the sneaky problem of performative honesty when you share real feelings, but you do it in a way that makes you feel watched, dependent, and weirdly empty afterward. You'll learn how to stay real without turning your inner life into public property. Section 3. The next boundary you need is this: stop using the internet as an emotional processing space, because expression without containment slowly turns your inner life into a performance. When you process feelings publicly instead of privately, you may feel momentary relief, but you pay for it later with dependence, self-consciousness, and a quiet loss of dignity. If you never change this, you will keep confusing being seen with being supported, and you will keep wondering why sharing honestly still leaves you feeling strangely empty. Here's why this boundary works. Emotional processing and emotional broadcasting are not the same thing, even though the internet blurs them. Processing is about understanding what you feel so you can respond wisely. Broadcasting is about discharging feelings so you don't have to sit with it. The first strengthens you. The second often weakens you, because it ties relief to an audience. When your nervous system learns that posting equals relief, it starts pushing you to share before you understand yourself. That's how you end up explaining feelings you haven't even sorted yet, defending positions you don't fully believe, or oversharing details that later feel too exposed to take back. There's also a subtle psychological shift that happens when emotions go public too early. The moment you share them online, they stop being fluid. They harden. People respond to the version you posted, not the version you're still discovering. You then feel pressure to stay consistent with what you already said, even if your understanding changes. A calmer, more grounded version of you allows emotions to evolve before they're witnessed. That version doesn't rush to narrate the story while it's still being written. So the boundary here isn't silence. It's sequencing. You process first, then decide whether sharing serves you. And to make that practical, you need a simple internal line that interrupts the reflex to narrate your feelings in real time. Here's the exact microscript: this feeling needs clarity, not an audience. Say it exactly like that. It's not judgmental. It doesn't deny the emotion. It simply reminds you that not everything you feel is meant to be witnessed while it's raw. Let's ground this in a real example. Imagine it's Sunday night. You're scrolling on your couch, already a little heavy about the week ahead. Something reminds you of a family situation that's been bothering you, an offhand comment, a lingering resentment, a sense of being misunderstood. Old you opens Instagram or X and starts typing a vague but pointed post about boundaries, respect, or being tired of carrying everything alone. You don't name names, but you know who it's about. The post gets likes. A few people comment supportive things. For a moment, you feel seen. Then comes the aftertaste. You reread it and wonder who interpreted it how. You worry someone will connect the dots. You feel oddly locked into a version of yourself that sounds more wounded than you actually want to be. The relief fades, but the exposure remains. New you notices the same urge to post, but you pause. You say the line silently: this feeling needs clarity, not an audience. Instead of posting, you open a blank note or just sit with the feeling for 5 minutes. You ask yourself one honest question: what am I actually upset about? Not what would sound good online. Not what would earn empathy. Just what's true. Maybe you realize you're not angry, you're disappointed. Or you're tired. Or you heard about something older that this moment stirred up. That insight changes how you show up later. You might still talk about it, but privately, with someone who can hold it, or after the edge has softened. You keep your dignity intact. This shows up at work too. Picture a stressful Monday morning. A meeting doesn't go well. You feel dismissed. Old events on a private Slack channel or posts a relatable work meme that hints at incompetence or frustration. It gets laughs, but it also reinforces an identity, the disgruntled one, the one who's always irritated. New you processes first. You step away from the keyboard. You name the feeling without sharing it. You decide later whether it needs to be addressed directly, privately, or not at all. The difference isn't suppression. It's containment. Here's the tiny action you can take today. For the next 48 hours, pick one emotion you will not process online. Just one. It might be frustration with family, disappointment in dating, resentment at work, or anxiety about money. When that emotion shows up, you make yourself one promise: no posting, no vague stories, and no comment section venting. You don't have to solve it. You're just keeping it offline long enough to understand it. To make this easier, give the emotion a container. That might be a private note on your phone. It might be a single trusted person you talk to directly. It might be a walk where you let the thoughts finish themselves without interruption. The key is that the first expression is private, not public. Now let's slow this down together for a moment, because this boundary can feel uncomfortable at first. Right now, pause and take one slow breath in and a longer breath out. Do it again, letting your jaw unclench slightly. Bring to mind a feeling you've recently shared online that you later wished you'd kept to yourself. Don't judge it. Just notice it. Notice what you were hoping to get from sharing it. Validation? Relief? Understanding? Now repeat the line once, softly. This feeling needs clarity, not an audience. Say it again, slower, and notice how it lands differently the second time. What you're practicing here is emotional self-respect. You're treating your inner life like something valuable, not like raw footage. That matters because when you process privately, you regain authorship. You decide how the story is told, or whether it's told at all. You stop being pulled into comment section therapy and start building real understanding instead of borrowed reassurance. There's also a long-term effect that's easy to miss. When you stop processing emotions publicly, you stop training people to expect access to your inner world on demand. You become harder to read in a good way. Not secretive, selective. People learn that when you share something personal, it's considered, not impulsive. That increases trust instead of draining it. This doesn't mean you never share struggles online. It means you share from the other side of understanding, not from the middle of confusion. You share to contribute, not to regulate. And when you do that, your words carry more weight and less cost. If you feel a little resistance to this, that's normal. The internet has trained you to narrate everything in real time. You're unlearning that reflex. You're teaching yourself that silence, for a moment, is not abandonment, it's preparation. Keep this boundary in mind as we move forward, because the next piece builds directly on it. Once you stop processing emotions online, you still need a way to decide what actually belongs on the internet at all. In the next section, we'll build a simple personal filter that helps you choose what to share without overthinking or second-guessing yourself. Section 4. Another boundary that protects your peace is this: decide what belongs on the internet by category, not by mood. When you rely on how you feel in the moment to decide what to share, you'll keep crossing lines you didn't mean to cross. And if you never change this, you'll stay stuck in a cycle of posting, second-guessing, deleting, explaining, or wishing you could rewind, losing energy each time. Here's why this matters. Mood is unstable. One day you feel confident and open, the next day you reread the same post and feel exposed. When sharing decisions are mood-based, your standards shift constantly. What felt honest yesterday feels unnecessary today. What felt empowering last night feels embarrassing in the morning. That's not because you were wrong, it's because the mood is a terrible gatekeeper. A steadier version of you doesn't ask, "How do I feel right now?" before sharing. That version asks, "Does this category of information belong in public at all?" This boundary works because it moves the decision upstream. Instead of debating every post, you pre-decide which parts of your life are private, which are selectively shared, and which are public. Once that's decided, you don't negotiate with yourself every time emotion shows up. You reduce friction. You reduce regret. You reduce the mental load of constantly asking, "Should I have posted that?" The internet quietly encourages you to treat everything as shareable. Wins, losses, confusion, conflict, healing, anger, growth, it all gets flattened into content. But your life isn't content. It's layered. Some layers are sturdy enough for public space. Others need walls. So here's the microscript that supports this boundary. It's simple, but it cuts through a lot of noise. This category of my life is not for public processing. Say it exactly like that. You're not saying the thing is unimportant. You're saying it deserves a different container. Let's make this concrete. Think about money. Many people post casually about financial stress, debt, side hustles, or comparisons, sometimes joking, sometimes venting. You might post something vague about being broke, overwhelmed, or frustrated with expenses. It feels relatable. People respond. But later, you notice it shifts how people treat you. Advice you didn't ask for. Assumptions about your stability. A subtle sense of being judged or pitted. Knew you decide ahead of time, money stress is a private category. That doesn't mean you never talk about it. It means you choose a trusted person, not a feed. When the urge to post hits, you say the line, "This category of my life is not for public processing." The urge passes, and so does the exposure. Or take relationship conflicts. Imagine an argument with a partner or co-parent. You post a quote about boundaries or emotional labor, knowing exactly who it's about. You don't name them, but the internet becomes a stand-in for the conversation you're avoiding or not ready to have. It feels powerful for a moment. Later, it complicates everything. Screenshots. Hurt feelings. Trust erosion. Knew you has a pre-decided rule, active conflict is private. You don't narrate it in real time. You deal with it directly, or you wait. You don't turn tension into subtextual performance. This boundary also applies to growth. Even positive things can become draining when overshared. You don't need to document every insight, every realization, every boundary you're learning to hold. Some growth needs silence to settle. When you post too early, you start performing change instead of embodying it. You feel pressure to live up to the version of yourself you announced, instead of letting it develop naturally. Here's the tiny action you can take today. Write down, mentally or on paper, 3 categories of your life that are off limits for public sharing while they're active. Not forever. Just while they're alive and unresolved. Examples might be ongoing relationship tension, active family conflict, money stress, health worries, or workplace frustration. You don't need perfect categories. You just need clear ones. Once you choose them, you stop debating each post individually. The rule does the work for you. To make this stick, attach a reason to each category. Not a dramatic reason, just a grounded one. For example, money stress stays private because public commentary makes me anxious and defensive. Or, relationship conflict stays private because it deserves direct resolution, not indirect commentary. Reasons make boundaries feel protective instead of restrictive. Now let's slow this down with a short practice, because part of what makes this hard is the discomfort of not expressing something immediately. Right now, take a slow breath in and a longer breath out. As you exhale, imagine putting a lid on a container, not locking it away, just setting it aside safely. Bring to mind one thing you've been tempted to share lately. Ask yourself, gently, what category does this belong to? Not is it true? Not will people like it? Just, is this a public category for me? Now say the line once, This category of my life is not for public processing. Notice how that feels. Often there's a small sense of relief, like you've removed yourself from a decision you didn't actually want to make. This boundary also changes how you experience other people's content. When you're clear about your own categories, you stop feeling pressure to match other people's openness. You stop thinking, they shared this, so I should too. You remember that visibility is not a requirement. Privacy is not secrecy. It's self-trust. There's a deeper identity shift happening here as well. You stop treating your inner life like it needs constant narration to be real. You reclaim the right to experience things without witnesses. That steadiness shows up everywhere. You speak less impulsively. You explain less. You feel less pulled to justify yourself. People sense it, even if they can't name it. And this boundary isn't about becoming unreachable. It's about being reachable in the right ways. When you do share something personal, it lands differently because it's intentional. It's not noise. It's a signal. If part of you worries this will make you feel disconnected, notice that fear without obeying it. Real connection doesn't come from broadcasting everything. It comes from choosing who gets access and when. The internet blurs that line. You're redrawing it. As we move forward, this category filter becomes the foundation for the next boundary. Once you know what doesn't belong online, you still need a way to handle people who push, pry, or expect access anyway. In the next section, we'll build a calm, repeatable way to say less without sounding cold or defensive, and how that single shift saves you from endless explaining. Section 5. Another boundary that quietly saves you from exhaustion is this: stop over-explaining yourself online and in messages, because explanation is often a disguised form of seeking permission. When you feel the urge to justify, clarify, or defend your choices in public or semi-public spaces, you're usually trying to manage other people's reactions instead of standing on your decision. If you never change this, you'll keep leaking energy into explanations that don't actually create understanding, they just keep you entangled. Here's why this boundary works. Over-explaining doesn't calm situations down the way you think it does. Most of the time, it does the opposite. When you add more words, more context, more reasoning, you give people more surface area to push against. They latch onto one detail, misunderstand another, or debate something you never meant to debate. And because the internet strips away tone and timing, explanations often read as defensive even when they're sincere. A steadier version of you understands this: clarity isn't created by volume. It's created by limits. There's also a deeper reason you over-explain that's worth naming. You over-explain when you're unsure you're allowed to choose what you chose. When you feel solid, you state and move on. When you feel shaky, you justify. The moment you start writing paragraphs to make your decision palatable to everyone, you've already stepped off your own ground. And once you're off your ground, you're easy to pull into debate, guilt, or endless back and forth. So the boundary here is learning how to say less without sounding cold, rude, or evasive. You're not stonewalling. You're closing the door gently instead of holding it open and hoping no one barges in. Here's the exact microscript that supports this boundary. It's intentionally plain: this is what works for me right now. That's it. Say it exactly like that. No follow-up explanation unless you genuinely want one. No justification. No apology. This sentence does something powerful. It states a decision without inviting negotiation. Let's put this into a real, everyday example. Imagine a group chat with friends. Someone suggests a plan you don't want to join. Maybe it's expensive, exhausting, or just not aligned with your week. You launch into reasons. You explain your budget, your schedule, your mood, your stress level. Someone counters with solutions. Someone minimizes your concern. Suddenly you're debating your own capacity. You replies once: "I'm going to pass. This is what works for me right now." That's it. You don't disappear. You don't justify. You don't stay to argue. The conversation moves on, and you keep your energy. Or take a work example. A coworker asks why you didn't respond immediately to a message or why you're not available at a certain time. Old you writes a long explanation about meetings, workload, and priorities. You say, calmly and professionally, I check messages at set times. This is what works for me right now. Notice what's missing. You're not asking permission. You're stating a boundary as a fact. Most people accept it because there's nothing to push against. This shows up online too. Imagine you decide not to engage in a comment thread that's turning heated. Old you feel compelled to explain your silence or post a clarification so people don't misunderstand. New you don't. Or if you do respond, it's one line, I'm stepping back from this conversation, this is what works for me right now. You don't argue your way out. You exit cleanly. Here's the tiny action you can take today. Choose one situation, just one, where you usually over-explain. It might be declining plans, setting a response boundary, or disengaging from an online discussion. When it comes up, use the microscript once, and then stop typing. Literally stop. Don't add a second sentence. Don't soften it with extra context. Let the discomfort be there. The action isn't in the words, it's in resisting the urge to keep talking. To help your body tolerate that discomfort, we're going to slow this down for a moment. Right now, take a slow breath in and let it out longer than you think you need to. As you exhale, imagine setting a boundary and not chasing the reaction. Bring to mind a recent moment where you explained yourself more than you wanted to. Notice the tension that followed. Now say the line quietly, this is what works for me right now. Say it again, slower, and notice how it lands when you're not rushing to defend it. This boundary matters because explanation keeps you emotionally available to people who may not be acting in good faith or who simply don't need access to your reasoning. When you explain less, you stop feeding arguments that were never meant to end. You also stop training people to expect transparency on demand. You're teaching them, gently, that you make choices and stand by them. There's an identity shift embedded here too. You move from I need you to understand me to I understand myself. That doesn't mean you never explain anything. It means explanation becomes a choice, not a reflex. You explain when it builds connection. You don't explain when it only builds friction. At first, this may feel selfish or abrupt, especially if you're used to being accommodating. That feeling is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're breaking a pattern. You're stepping out of the role of emotional customer service and into the role of self-leadership. Notice how this pairs with the earlier boundaries. You're no longer reacting while activated. You're no longer processing emotions publicly. You've decided what categories stay private. Now, you're learning to stop narrating and justifying those decisions. These layers work together. Each one reduces how much of you is available for unnecessary debate. As we move into the next section, we'll take this even further. Because once you stop over-explaining, people sometimes push harder. They ask follow-up questions. They test the boundary. In the next part, you'll learn how to hold your line calmly when someone presses for access you're no longer offering, without escalating, snapping, or giving in. Section 6. Another boundary that keeps your peace intact is this: don't match escalation when people push for more access than you're offering, because escalation is how boundaries get worn down. When someone presses, questions, or subtly challenges your limit, the instinct is to either give in or get sharp. Both reactions cost you. If you never change this, you'll keep finding yourself dragged into longer conversations, heavier explanations, or emotional spikes you didn't plan to have. Here's why this boundary works. Most boundary pressure isn't loud or aggressive. It's quiet. It sounds reasonable. It comes as follow-up questions, concerns, jokes, or I'm just trying to understand. When you match that pressure with more words, more emotion, or more intensity, you signal that the boundary is negotiable. You teach people that if they push a little harder, you'll open the door wider. A steadier version of you understands that boundaries hold best when your tone stays lower than the pressure coming at you. This is especially important online and in text-based spaces where escalation happens fast. A simple statement turns into a thread. A calm limit turns into a debate. A single question turns into a demand for justification. The internet rewards intensity, but intensity weakens boundaries. Calmness strengthens them. So the skill here isn't saying something new. It's repeating yourself without changing your emotional temperature. You don't add detail. You don't sharpen your tone. You don't apologize more. You don't explain again. You stay steady. Here's the exact microscript for this boundary. I'm not going to get into that. That's it. Say it neutrally. Not sarcastically. Not defensively. Just factual. This sentence doesn't argue. It doesn't attack. It simply ends the line of inquiry. Let's make this real. Imagine a family group chat. Someone comments on a choice you made, how you're parenting, spending money, or handling a situation. You give a brief response or set a boundary. They come back with, "But why?" You feel the pull to explain. You start typing paragraphs, hoping that if you say it the right way, they'll finally respect it. You doesn't escalate. You reply once more, calmly, "I'm not going to get into that." No heat. No added detail. The conversation either moves on or reveals something important. They weren't actually seeking understanding, they were seeking access. Either way, you keep your ground. Or take a workplace example. A coworker or manager pushes back on a boundary you set around availability. You've already stated when you respond. They press again, maybe with urgency or guilt. You scramble, trying to sound helpful while feeling resentful. You stay steady. You repeat your limit in a neutral way, or you say the line, "I'm not going to get into that." You don't debate your calendar. You don't justify your capacity. You let the boundary do the work. This comes up constantly online too. You decide not to engage in a comment thread. Someone replies tagging you, asking you to explain yourself, clarify your intent, or defend your position. You feels exposed and jumps back in. You don't. Or if you respond at all, it's one calm line, "I'm not going to get into that." Then you stop. You don't linger. You don't monitor the reactions. You don't reopen the door. Here's why this works psychologically. People often escalate because they sense uncertainty. When your tone stays calm and unchanged, there's nothing to grab onto. No emotion to hook. No argument to extend. You're not trying to win. You're refusing to play. And most escalators die without fuel. Here's the tiny action you can take today. Think of one person or one situation where you know the push will come, a follow-up question, a probing comment, a subtle challenge. Decide ahead of time that if it happens, you will not add new information. You will either repeat your original boundary or use the microscript once. Then you stop. That's the action. The preparation is the power. Now let's slow this down, because the hardest part of this boundary is tolerating the discomfort that follows. Right now, take a slow breath in and let it out through your mouth. As you exhale, imagine yourself staying still while someone pushes. Notice the urge to fill the silence, to smooth things over, to explain more. Don't judge it. Just notice it. Now, in your own voice, say the sentence once, "I'm not going to get into that." Say it again, slower, without edge. Let your body feel what it's like to stop instead of continue. This boundary matters because escalation trains you to abandon yourself. Every time you give more than you intended just to end discomfort, you teach your nervous system that pressure works. Over time, you become easier to push, not because you're weak, but because you've practiced giving in. This practice reverses that pattern. You teach yourself that you can survive the awkwardness, the silence, the raised eyebrow, the unread message. There's also a dignity shift here. When you don't escalate, you stop shrinking or flaring. You stay an adult. You stay self-directed. You don't need the other person to agree with you for the boundary to stand. You don't need to convince them. You simply need to hold your line. This doesn't mean you never explain anything, ever. It means you don't explain under pressure. You explain when it's collaborative, not coercive. You explain when it builds trust, not when it drains you. And because you've already practiced saying less in the previous section, this becomes easier. You're not suddenly clamming up, you're being consistent. Notice how these boundaries stack. You pause instead of reacting. You process emotions privately. You decide categories ahead of time. You stop over-explaining. Now, you refuse to match escalation. Each layer removes another way people can pull your inner life into public or into debate. And here's the quiet benefit you'll start to notice: people adjust. Not everyone, but enough. They learn where the edges are. They stop poking as much. Or they reveal themselves clearly when they keep pushing, which gives you information you can act on later. Either outcome is useful. As we move into the next section, we'll address the moment that scares most people the most: disengaging completely when understanding isn't available. Because sometimes the healthiest boundary isn't holding the line, it's walking away without guilt. Section 7. Another boundary that protects your peace is this: learn how to disengage without guilt when understanding isn't available, because not every conversation is meant to reach resolution. Some exchanges are structured to keep you stuck explaining, defending, or proving yourself, and staying in them doesn't make you noble, it makes you depleted. If you never change this, you'll keep burning energy trying to be understood by people who aren't actually listening. Here's why this boundary works. Many people assume that staying engaged is the mature thing to do, that leaving a conversation unfinished means you failed somehow. But in reality, disengagement is often the most accurate response to a situation that has stopped being reciprocal. Understanding requires two conditions: willingness and capacity. When either one is missing, no amount of clarity on your part can create it. A steadier version of you doesn't confuse persistence with integrity. That version knows when the conversation has crossed from productive into draining. This matters especially online, where misunderstanding is easy and incentives are misaligned. Comment sections reward argument, not resolution. Text threads flatten nuance. People skim, project, and respond to the version of you they've already decided you are. When you keep trying to correct or clarify, you're often arguing with a caricature, not a person. And the longer you stay, the more invested you feel, even as the return diminishes. So the skill here isn't winning or convincing. It's recognizing the moment when the cost of staying exceeds the benefit, and allowing yourself to leave without turning it into a moral crisis. Here's the exact microscript for this boundary. It's calm and final: I don't think this conversation is going anywhere, so I'm stepping away. Say it exactly like that. No accusation. No dramatic exit. No long explanation. This sentence names reality without attacking anyone. Let's make this real with a familiar scenario. Imagine an online discussion that starts reasonably. You comment thoughtfully. Someone replies aggressively or dismissively. You respond once, trying to clarify. They come back again, twisting your words or escalating the tone. You keep going, partly out of pride, partly out of fear of losing, partly because being misunderstood feels unbearable. Minutes turn into an hour. Your mood drops. You feel tight and irritated long after you close the app. Knew you recognized the pattern earlier. After one or two exchanges, you notice there's no movement, just repetition and heat. You reply once more, or not at all. If you do reply, it's the line: I don't think this conversation is going anywhere, so I'm stepping away. Then you actually step away. You don't hover. You don't check back. You don't reread responses. You end it cleanly. This also shows up in personal relationships. Picture a text exchange with someone who keeps misunderstanding your boundary or reframing it as a personal attack. You've clarified. You've softened. You've explained. Nothing changes. You stay, hoping the next message will finally land. You disengage without making it dramatic. You say the line, or you simply stop responding. You let the silence do what more words can't. Here's the uncomfortable truth this boundary forces you to face. Some people don't want clarity. They want leverage. They want reassurance. They want control. Or they want you emotionally available so they don't have to sit with their own discomfort. Staying engaged in those moments trains them that persistence works. Disengaging teaches them something else, that access is conditional. Here's the tiny action you can take today. Think of one ongoing conversation, online or offline, that feels stuck, repetitive, or draining. Decide ahead of time what your exit point is. It might be one more response. There might be no response at all. It might be using the microscript once. The action is not waiting until you're exhausted. The action is choosing your stopping point in advance. To make this easier on your nervous system, we need to slow it down, because disengagement often triggers guilt or anxiety. Right now, take a slow breath in and let it out slowly. As you exhale, imagine closing a door gently, not slamming it. Bring to mind a conversation you wish you'd ended sooner. Notice the urge to explain one more time. Now say the sentence once, quietly, I don't think this conversation is going anywhere, so I'm stepping away. Say it again, slower. Notice how the body responds. Often there's a mix of discomfort and relief. That relief matters. This boundary matters because guilt is often just delayed self-betrayal. You feel guilty not because you did something wrong, but because you're not used to prioritizing your own limits. When you disengage, you're not being cruel. You're being accurate. You're acknowledging what is actually happening instead of what you wish were happening. There's also a dignity shift here. You stop auditioning for understanding. You stop needing the last word. You stop trying to control how you're perceived by people who have already decided. That doesn't make you passive. It makes you free. And notice how this builds on the previous boundaries. You're no longer reacting while activated. You're not processing emotions publicly. You've decided which categories stay private. You've stopped over-explaining. You've refused to match escalation. Now, you're allowing yourself to exit entirely when staying would only cost you more. Each boundary removes another way your peace gets negotiated away. This doesn't mean you disappear from hard conversations altogether. It means you reserve your energy for conversations that can actually change something. You stay engaged where there's mutual effort. You step away where there isn't. That selectivity is not avoidance, it's wisdom. You may worry that disengaging will make you seem uncaring or weak. In practice, the opposite often happens. People who respect you respect your limits. People who don't are never going to be satisfied anyway. Either way, you gain clarity. As we move into the next section, we're going to address a subtler pressure that keeps pulling you back in even after you disengage, the invisible audience in your head. The imagined watchers who make you feel like you need to clarify, perform, or prove something even when no one is asking. That's where the final layer of this boundary work comes together. Section 8. The final boundary before we put everything together is this: stop living for the invisible audience in your head, because imagined watchers can drain you just as much as real ones. Even when no one is actively commenting, messaging, or pushing, you may still feel watched. You rehearse explanations. You mentally justify choices. You imagine how something would look if you posted it, or how it might be judged if you didn't. If you never change this, you'll keep giving away attention to people who aren't even there. Here's why this boundary works. The invisible audience is a byproduct of constant connectivity. When you spend enough time online, your brain learns to anticipate reactions. You don't just post and then wait, you pre-react. You edit your thoughts before you even share them. You shape decisions around how they might be perceived. Over time, this turns into a low-grade vigilance that follows you offline. You're not just living your life, you're narrating it in your head. And narration without rest is exhausting. This imagined audience feels harmless because it's quiet. No one is attacking you. No one is demanding anything. But the cost is subtle and cumulative. You lose spontaneity. You lose privacy inside your own mind. You start making choices with a slight tilt toward optics instead of alignment. A steadier version of you notices this and reclaims the right to exist without commentary. This boundary works because it collapses a false assumption that being perceived equals being accountable. You don't actually owe coherence, clarity, or explanation to hypothetical observers. Most people are not thinking about you nearly as much as your mind suggests. And even when they are, their interpretations are not something you can manage without losing yourself in the process. So the skill here is learning to interrupt the inner performance loop, the habit of explaining your life to no one. Here's the exact microscript for this boundary. It's internal, not spoken out loud. No one needs a statement from me about this. Say it exactly like that. This line is powerful because it dissolves a problem that only exists in imagination. You're not rejecting people. You're releasing yourself from an obligation that was never real. Let's ground this in a familiar scenario. Imagine you decide not to post for a few days. Nothing dramatic, you're just busy or quiet. You start narrating. You wonder if people think you're upset, disengaged, or trying to make a point. You consider posting something light just to signal that everything's fine. That's the invisible audience at work. You notices the urge and says the line internally, no one needs a statement from me about this. You don't post. You go about your day. And slowly, the itch fades. You remember what it's like to live without broadcasting proof of normalcy. Or imagine you make a choice that doesn't fit your usual image. You skip an event. You change your mind about something you were vocal about before. You take a break from a role or routine. You rehearse explanations in advance, just in case someone asks. You feel pressure to clarify preemptively. You don't. You wait to see if anyone actually asks. Most of the time, no one does. The performance was never required. This shows up at work too. You set a boundary around availability or workload. Even after you've communicated it once, you keep mentally defending it. You imagine how it looks. You worry about being judged as lazy or difficult. You interrupts that loop. You remind yourself that you already communicated what mattered. You don't need to keep justifying it in your head. You redirect attention back to what's in front of you. Here's the tiny action you can take today. For one full day, notice when you start mentally explaining yourself to people who aren't present. Not out loud, just in your head. When you catch it, say the line once, no one needs a statement from me about this. Then return to what you were doing. That's it. The action is awareness plus interruption, repeated gently. To support this, let's slow down for a moment. Right now, take a slow breath in and a long breath out. As you exhale, imagine a spotlight turning off, not dramatically, just dimming. Bring to mind one recent decision you've been silently defending in your head. Notice how much energy that defense takes. Now say the line quietly, no one needs a statement from me about this. Say it again, slower. Feel the space that opens when you stop performing. This boundary matters because the invisible audience keeps old patterns alive even after you've changed your behavior. You might stop oversharing publicly, but still overshare internally by rehearsing explanations and judgments. This is the final layer of privacy, privacy inside your own mind. When you reclaim it, your attention comes back to you. There's also an identity shift here. You stop living as a character and start living as a person. You don't need to be legible at all times. You don't need to be consistent for an imaginary crowd. You're allowed to be in process without narrating the process. This doesn't make you disconnected. It makes you present. When you're not busy managing perception, you have more capacity for real interaction when it actually happens. You listen better. You respond more cleanly. You choose words instead of reflexively explaining. Notice how this completes the boundary system you've been building. You pause instead of reacting. You process emotions privately. You decide categories ahead of time. You stop over-explaining. You don't match escalation. You disengage when understanding isn't available. And now, you release the invisible audience entirely. Each step removes another drain on your attention. By the time you reach this point, something important shifts. You feel less exposed, even if your online activity hasn't changed dramatically. That's because exposure isn't just about what you share, it's about how much of yourself you give away to reaction, perception, and imagined judgment. Hold on to this feeling of space, because in the next part, we're going to put multiple boundaries to the test at once. We'll walk through a real, pressure-filled moment, a familiar evening scenario, where the old habits almost take over, and you'll see how these tools actually work together in real time to protect your peace. Section 9. It's Friday evening, and you're finally home after a long week. Shoes off, phone in hand, you drop onto the couch telling yourself you're just going to check a few things and then relax. As you unlock your phone, a notification pops up. Someone replied to something you posted earlier in the week. Not a full argument, not overtly rude, but sharp enough to sting. Before you even open it, you feel that familiar tightening in your chest. Your body already knows the pattern. You open the thread. The reply reframes your words in a way that feels unfair. A couple of people have liked it. No one has defended you. The old reflex kicks in instantly. You want to clarify. You want to explain what you meant. You want to correct the record so you don't look foolish, dramatic, or wrong. Your thumbs hover over the keyboard, already forming sentences. This is the exact kind of moment we teased earlier, the one that usually hijacks your weekend. You notice the urge is strong, almost physical. Your heart is beating faster. Your thoughts are racing ahead to imagined responses. Instead of typing, you pause. Just for a second. You remember the first boundary. You don't need to respond while activated. You quietly say to yourself, I don't need to respond or post this right now. I'll check back on it tomorrow. You set the phone face down on the coffee table. At first, the discomfort spikes. You feel unfinished. Like you're letting something slide. So you slow it down. You take a breath in through your nose, hold it briefly, and let it out slowly. Then another. The feeling doesn't vanish, but it softens enough that you can think. You pick the phone back up, not to reply, but to look clearly. You ask yourself the next question you've practiced: what category does this belong to? This isn't a factual correction that needs to happen tonight. It's not urgent work. It's not a close relationship. It's public perception and mild conflict, one of the categories you already decided isn't for real-time processing. You feel a small sense of relief as you name that. You don't have to solve this now, or at all. Still, part of you wants to say something. You imagine how it might look if you don't respond. The invisible audience starts whispering. You catch it. You tell yourself, no one needs a statement from me about this. That sentence lands harder than you expect. The imagined crowd fades a bit. A few minutes later, another notification appears. Someone else has replied, asking a pointed follow-up question. It's framed politely, but it clearly invites debate. This is where you usually get pulled back in, explaining your position more carefully, hoping this time it will land. You feel the pull again, but now you recognize it as escalation pressure. You open the message. You read it once. You don't rush. You decide you're not going to add new information. If you respond at all, it will be minimal. You type one sentence, slowly, I'm not going to get into that. You read it again to check your tone. It's neutral. You send it. Then you mute the thread. The moment you mute it, your shoulders drop slightly. You didn't win anything. You didn't convince anyone. But you also didn't lose yourself. You didn't spill into a debate that would have followed you into Saturday morning. Later that night, as you're making dinner, you feel a flicker of guilt. Maybe you were too abrupt. Maybe you should have explained more. That old habit tries to reassert itself. You notice it and let it pass. You remind yourself that explanation under pressure is not clarity, it's surrender. You chose steadiness instead. Before bed, curiosity tugs at you. You wonder what else was said after you muted the thread. This is another familiar trap. Instead of giving in, you pause again. You take one slow breath. You tell yourself, I don't think this conversation is going anywhere, and I've already stepped away. You leave the phone on the charger and walk to the bedroom. The next morning, you wake up without that heavy feeling in your chest. You didn't spend the night replaying responses. You didn't draft imaginary comebacks in your head. You slept. Over coffee, you remember the thread and realize something important. It already feels less important. What felt urgent last night now feels optional. Later that day, you check the muted thread out of curiosity, not compulsion. There are more comments. Some agree with the other person. Some agree with you. Nothing resolved. Nothing catastrophic happened. The world moved on without your clarification. That's the moment it really sinks in. Your presence was never as required as your emotions told you it was. You go about the rest of your Saturday lighter. You run errands. You talk to someone you actually trust about something real. You're more patient, more present. The absence of that online tension leaves space for your actual life. This is what it looks like when boundaries work together. You paused instead of reacting. You processed the feeling privately. You respected your category rules. You didn't over-explain. You refused to match escalation. You disengaged cleanly. And you released the invisible audience. None of it was dramatic. None of it required a manifesto. It was just a series of small, intentional choices that protected your peace. By Sunday evening, the situation barely registers anymore. But the effect does. You feel more solid. Less exposed. Less pulled outward. And that steadiness isn't fragile, it's earned. Section 10. This episode was really about one core shift, learning how to stop treating the internet like a place where your inner life has to be managed, defended, or explained, and starting to treat it as something you engage with on your terms. When you stop reacting automatically, stop narrating emotions in real time, and stop living for imagined judgment, you move from exposure to intention. The difference isn't silence versus sharing. It's mindless expression versus chosen response. First, we slowed everything down by naming the real pain, how oversharing and online drama quietly drain your focus, your sleep, and your sense of dignity without you noticing until you're already tired. Then you learn to interrupt urgency itself, creating a pause so emotions don't decide what gets posted or sent. Next, you practiced separating emotional processing from public expression, so feelings could become clear before they became visible. After that, you built a simple category filter that decided in advance which parts of your life don't belong online while they're still active. Then you stopped over-explaining, replacing justification with calm statements that don't invite debate. After that, you learned how to hold boundaries without matching escalation, keeping your tone steady even when others push. Then you practiced disengaging completely when understanding wasn't available, walking away without guilt instead of chasing resolution that never comes. Finally, you released the invisible audience, the imagined watchers who kept you explaining yourself even when no one asked. When you put all of that together in the Friday night moment, you saw how small choices changed the outcome. You paused instead of reacting. You used one sentence instead of a paragraph. You muted instead of monitoring. You slept instead of spiraling. Nothing dramatic happened outwardly, but inwardly, everything shifted. You kept your weekend. You kept your energy. You kept yourself. Now let's make this practical with 3 do-today steps you can actually use. Today, pick one platform or chat where you tend to react fast and commit to a 30-minute delay anytime you feel emotionally charged before posting or replying. Today, choose one category of your life, money stress, relationship conflict, or work frustration, and decide that it stays offline while it's unresolved. And today, The next time you catch yourself mentally explaining a choice to no one in particular, interrupt it with the sentence, "No one needs a statement from me about this," and return your attention to what you're doing. If this lesson resonated, the next thing you'll want to watch is a session on responding to messages without anxiety, how to set reply windows, stop overthinking tone, and keep communication from hijacking your day when you're already stretched thin. If you want a whole library of Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships, tools you can actually use in real moments, this is what we build here every week. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.